I'm going to now introduce our special guest for this week's call, and I'm really delighted to introduce Iain Anderson. Iain is an expert in integrated communications, global political risk, and public policy. He has over 25 years experience in communications, initially as a journalist and then as a founding shareholder at Incisive Media. He's worked on a range of politicians, including for the Right Honourable Kenneth Clarke on his leadership bids. And Iain is the co-founder and executive chairman of Cicero Group and focuses on public policy and corporate communications strategy, supporting many global FTSE and Fortune 500 blue chip organizations. He provides CEO and board level counsel. So obviously very privileged to be joined by Iain today, and he's going to be reflecting on his experience of leading his organization over the past couple of months and sharing some advice on trends and observations that he's noted in his role. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Iain now.
Thanks, Corey. Can you hear me loud and clear?
We hear you.
Good. Excellent. Great. The new Zoom thumb of happiness is there. So look, it's great to join you today. And yeah, I mean, Corey just asked me to spend a bit of time on just some of the reflections so far, and I mean there are so many. I mean, I was just trying to sort of make a list of things that are sort of top of mind for me, and it just goes on and on and on. But I'm trying to maybe try and bottle things down to 2 or 3 thoughts. Just before I do, we took our business right at the end of February. Into Havas and Vivendi. They took a 60% stake in what's now become Cicero AMO. We've got a slightly new branding, which I'm embellishing on the screen behind me so you can see it. And I was, for those of you in the UK today, I was getting slightly more concerned about what the UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak was going to do about entrepreneurs relief than I was getting about COVID. At the end of February, but well, we were obviously delighted to get that deal away. It's kind of created a fundamental change in our business, and it's made us truly global. I mean, I'm kind of seeing what's going on in China, seeing what's going on in ASEAN, seeing what's going on in places beyond Brussels. Our footprint is London, Brussels, and Dublin as Cicero, but I'm kind of seeing things across the kind of Havas and Vivendi world, North America too, that I just wouldn't have seen before. And it's been fascinating to watch how people have been opening up, sometimes locking down again, opening up again, and how the pandemic has kind of hit business flows for good and for bad on a kind of global basis. But my sort of starting point, Corey, is I think this is long haul now. I think that, we've moved beyond the point of thinking this is temporary. And I think that is creating fundamental adjustments in business models. I mean, our approach, probably the people on this call, but also for those of us who are running consultancies, running agencies, about what they're seeing in terms of the client approach. I've been really surprised through this, how I've heard how some comms directors, marketing directors, CEOs are kind of coming on to say how disappointed they are with some of the delivery from some folks in agency land. I mean, I've been through 4 or 5 different kinds of downturn really since we launched Cicero, and then obviously the kind of upswing again. And I think people work hard. We are certainly seeing opportunities from feedback where clients are saying they've been surprised that people are not adapting. I mean, I think, broadly most people are pretty resilient, but there are clearly market opportunities with around offers which are finding it very, very, very hard to adapt through this. We're clearly out of phase one, phase one being locked down and getting used to it, and did the broadband work at home, and could you work out how Zoom operated? We're maybe out of phase two, which was, I think, the start of unlocking and how to help businesses communicate through that. All the jobs, the jobs kind of clock of doom that is washing over us right now. Those decisions were taken 6 to 8 weeks ago. I think we're now in phase three. I mean, of probably a very long book, and we are certainly seeing project activity come back. I mean, 80% of my book, when we went into Havas in February, 80% of my world was retained. The project activity did disappear pretty quickly initially, but I'm seeing the project activity start to come back. People are testing things, they are trying things out. There's obviously an awful lot of restructuring that is going on right now, and that will be a theme that's with us for 8 months to 3 years ahead. And that's not just pandemic, that is, of course, the more fundamental change that people are taking in their own organizations. So I think there's quite a lot of project stuff that is starting to come through. The reach I think you can have is expanding massively. The ability to curate conversations with people that you really want to talk to. So we've been doing a whole bunch of kind of webinars, and yes, I mean there is sort of Zoom fatigue, no doubt about that. But for a quality speaker, we're still seeing. I mean, we did one with the governor of the Bank of England in May, like 750 people dialing into that. So even in the Great Havas village in King's Cross in London, physically I could have got 250 people in a room. I can now curate a quality of audience of over 700, and not worry about where they're located. And for the speaker or the speaker that you're interested in, it's a very, very efficient way of them getting into the conversation. So the reach is significantly larger, and I think that's one of the reasons why some of the project activity is coming through. We've started to return to office. One of our partner agencies within Havas, business called Gate One, they were acquired around about the same time as we were acquired, and they've done an amazing job on return to office. You walk in, you're immediately temperature scanned. There are one-way systems. There's a QR code on your desk so that you can track and trace and work out where people have sat. So everything can be deep cleaned. We're getting up now to about 30% of the team coming in regularly. That's just moving up week by week. But that said, everybody is working on a blended approach. I mean, I think the thing that we're still finding is that a lot of clients are still working from home and will be working from home for the foreseeable, so September into the new year. So, how you kind of get that mix of being in your kitchen, which is kind of where I am at the minute, despite the background, versus being in office, which is a bit more ergonomically set up. And therefore, what's the office for? Is it the place to collaborate? Is it the place to showcase ideas? Does it become a showroom, if you like, in the future? But that's provoking some pretty interesting conversations right now. I can see something across our client base in the property and retail side, where they're reimagining what the office is for, and maybe some of those offices are going to become for kind of key workers. It literally gets turned into residential stuff. So, but I think that also leads into quite interesting talent questions, in that I'm now quite agnostic as to where people work. Here in the UK, there's obviously been a big conversation about levelling up. well, do I care now whether or not my talent are based in Glasgow or Manchester or Bristol or New York or Dubai or wherever, yeah? Can I now just secure the best talent virtually? Do they need to be in Zone 1 London, in my case, or in the political quarter of Brussels, or in central Dublin? Do we need to worry about that? Final few comments, Corey, before I then just briefly turn to the yesterday in the UK budget, again, for those of you that are from the UK. On the pure public affairs side, I don't think I've ever seen policymakers more absorbent, more willing to kind of hear ideas. You're almost getting real-time responses to stuff at the minute. And I think that's fascinating. Often you need to provoke and prod and cajole to find out whether or not government wants to do anything. Right now, we're almost getting a real-time response to certain things. Now, partly that's because they're searching for the Holy Grail. But partly it's because they are just, I think, more open, suddenly more open to being lobbied. Yeah. I think there's a problem out of that, though, and I think what we're getting with policymaking is classic choice confusion. So you can get your idea across, they're accepting it, they're acknowledging it in a way that they wouldn't have done pre-COVID, but how do you create what I would call the Marcus Rashford moment? How do you elevate the idea so that that idea then turns into something that the government actually wants to do, or policymakers want to move on? China is my new Brexit. For those of you that know me, I wrote a book on Brexit as a sort of, I think, therapy exercise, just to get it all out of my head last year. But China is my new Brexit. I'm having 5 or 6 conversations about China every week, substantive conversations about China. And if we're pushing that money off the table, certainly for the UK, and if we're heading into what one might call a bipolar world, where there's an awful lot of, you're basically in the China camp, or you're in the broadly America camp, what's that going to mean? Clearly, if there's a change in the White House in November, that mixes things up even more. But that has been supercharged through this process too. And I think the final thing is the supply chain piece. I remember doing a conference about 7 or 8 months ago and being asked, would green ESG, social impact themes survive a cyclical downturn? Well, I mean, this isn't a cyclical downturn, this is a global pandemic, but people are doubling down. There's no doubt policymakers are doubling down, investors are doubling down. I think the boohoo news this week is fascinating, basically as a result of questions being asked about their supply chain, investors moving the money, and not waiting. So I think that's a fascinating impact. And then finally, Corey, yes, just on yesterday, we had Rishi Sunak serving up his Happy Meal vouchers to everyone. I mean, a final comment that they deliberately didn't call this a mini budget. They've absolutely, really, I was talking to Laura Koonsberg in the lobby yesterday, and she said to me, she was absolutely determined that this was not going to be defined and described as a mini budget. And I think the reason for that is that they don't know whether or not what he did yesterday is enough. No government knows whether or not what they're firing in policy terms is enough. And therefore, I think the expectation is that he's just going to have to come back and back and back to tweak or even do even more between now and the planned autumn statement and the spending review in the autumn. So, this is not the last we've heard from Rishi Sunak, and this is the start of life getting much, much, much harder for the government because of the because of the jobs effect. Sorry, that's a right old canter, Corey, through a
Yeah,
whole
no,
bunch
that's
of.
brilliant. I mean,
I hope that, I mean, basically just gives you a sense of what's top of mind in my crazy old mind right now.
yeah, I'll probably come back to a few of the points you made earlier on about industry trends, but just while we were on the Chancellor's announcement, just interested to get your view, and obviously it's quite a difficult question to answer, but in your view, do they go far enough? Are they what you would have expected at this stage? And how likely do you think it is that they're going to be kind of ramped up and really accelerating the economic support over the next few months?
So last week here in the UK, the chief economist at the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, came out with a view that the bank thinks that there's a good chance that the recovery could be V-shaped. Now, a lot of people are surprised by that. And I mean, the bank has all these agents that are rather intriguingly called Bank of England agents that wander around talking to businesses about what's going on. And I was talking to the CEO of a lender, a mortgage lender, start of this week, who'd been talking to the Bank of England, saying that they are seeing surging mortgage and remortgage applications again. And perhaps even more interestingly, that 80% of the people who'd asked for a payment holiday on their mortgage or their car loan was now starting to pay the money back. Now that is good news, but equally that means 20% of people are not paying the money back. Yeah, and I don't want to get into the gloomometer, but you've got to be real. But I think, and there'll be people on this call who are working on jobs announcements. Unfortunately, we ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, the reason we've had last week and this week of lots and lots and lots and lots of bad news on the jobs front is, of course, most people in most places are employed on a rolling 1 month basis, aren't they? And this is businesses getting ahead of the end of furlough, which in the UK starts as we get into August. And that's really why they're rolling out these announcements. So, from hospitality, obviously a big thumbs up to the VAT move and the voucher for August. But from other parts of the pie, the economic pie, certainly since yesterday, I've heard the constant refrain, he's going to have to do more. And he's resisted the idea of special packages for certain parts of the economy. Whether or not he's going to be able to hold the line on that, because there are clearly, I mean, it's, we can see it already. There are parts of the pie that are just, that haven't been able to trade at all through this. And whether or not he comes back to revisit that concept in the weeks ahead, I think that's what we've got to continue looking. So at the moment, the sense he may not have done enough.
Thank you. We've had a question come in from Rax Lakhani, and he's asking specifically about the Kickstarter scheme.
Yeah.
And he was interested to get your thoughts on that. And is it a potential route for the PR and comms industry to recruit effectively at entry level?
Yeah, no, I think it could be. I think it could be. As ever with these kind of very grandiloquent statements that you get from a dispatch box, you then suddenly start reading the Treasury notes and the HMRC notes, and everybody starts thinking, "Oh my God, is this complicated?" The one thing I will give Sunak is when you look at furlough, and you look at also, this is something obviously you guys at the PRCA were campaigning on in terms of the self-employed freelance issue. They did get that, and they did make it easier. Yeah. So, whether or not it's the Kickstarter scheme or giving people a voucher to go and have a meal, I think he does have this really strong sense that they need to make it as easy as possible. Because I think if it's not, most business owners they just glaze over and go, oh, unless this is really easy for me to operate through payroll or HMRC or whatever, yeah, then I'm probably not going to look at it, because by the time I've worked out whether I can use it, it's maybe too late. Because I mean, for a lot of smaller entities, there are real cash flow issues right now. So if they're going to make it work, they need the money flowing right now. Now, it's fascinating, isn't it? Actually, through all this, I'm focusing so much more on Rishi Sunak that I haven't even mentioned the Prime Minister yet. I mean, I just think that this overall sense, obviously from business, that and this is the other flip, Corey, that from February, when he replaced his Chancellor, and the sense was that number 10 was going to be controlling the entire operation. That actually, we now have a Chancellor that's more popular than the Prime Minister. So it's speed. I think it is an opportunity, but I think that my answer is that I think the proof of the pudding will be how easy these things are to navigate. If it looks like, if it looks like some of the benefit system, which is very hard to navigate, then probably a lot of businesses won't go anywhere near it. If it's easy to navigate and fast, and the money appears quickly, like the furlough scheme, the money was going into people's bank accounts in a week, then he'll get some traction with it.
Thank you. Siobhan's got another question that she'd like to ask you about the employment cutting across the Brexit divide.
Thanks, Corey. And thanks, Iain. Really insightful conversation. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you really well.
Great. Excellent. So the question I've got is, you were talking about how you as a leader, and certainly other leaders, are thinking very differently about that trust dynamic of having people physically in your headquarters, or, having to work within the normal centres like London or Dublin or Brussels, for example. And I wonder if the lockdown and the crisis with COVID presents an opportunity for those businesses that have been grappling with Brexit and trade agreements and losing talent out of the UK because of what Brexit means for certain workers, that this might present a really neat opportunity or an exciting opportunity for leaders to think differently about who they employ and where they're employed from.
So the quick answer is yes, and people are. And I think that, I go back to what I said about 10, 15 minutes ago, that I am now I've always believed this anyway. And I've tried to do this in terms of where we recruit people from. Try to recruit people from diverse talent pools, try to recruit people from diverse geographies. My accent belies I'm not from London and the Southeast, so and so therefore there is a chance to rethink here. There is a chance to complete rethink. I mean, I did something with a university the other day in University of Wales in Cardiff, and I was saying to them this, I'm answering a very similar kind of question. And one of the hardest questions that I think we've all probably had as leaders is it's just so much easier to find someone that lives 10 miles away from your office. And I think it is being rethought. Robert Peston does this program called, this outreach program called Speakers for Schools. And I've done it a few times. And the hardest question I've ever got was I think I was in Doncaster in South Yorkshire, and we'd done the chit chat, and then we moved to the Q&A. And one of the kids said, "So, sir, do I have to go to London to be successful?" And this is 3 years ago, and I ummed and I ahed, and I went, "Well, digital makes things easier, but this is all now supercharged. I really don't give a stuff about where people are. And actually, you know, there's been news in the past week about, you know, people recruiting, you know, former politicians from the bubble to go and advise clients. I don't know if that's the right approach anymore. I think you want to get people who outside the bubble so that they can properly understand what's been going on. And to your point as well, one can be completely agnostic as a beyond these shores. So one of the hardest things for lots of reasons, not least, candidly, some of the rigidity in terms of labour law, is growing a business and recruiting people in Brussels. You know, I mean, would you rather have somebody on a UK contract or somebody in Brussels? There's a lot of rigidity in terms of Belgian labour law. So therefore, you know, I'm thinking for our Brussels team, do we need people? Do we actually need people physically in Brussels? For our Dublin team, for our London, etc., etc., etc. So I think it's going to, you know, it is going to break out some brand new thinking. But here's the but. I think the bit that we're all grappling with is how do you define culture on Zoom? How, you know, people want to come and work for Cicero or come and work for the PRCA or any of the organisations that are on this call. Because they like you, because they identify with your values, they identify with your approach, they think they can bring something meaningful to the party. Virtual all the time is going to erode culture. No doubt about that in my head. So therefore, how do we blend realistically virtual with together in order to maintain culture and to kind of bottle what your offer is more distinctively? So I think there's going to be a blend, but what a blend means less office.
Yes.
And there's two big costs in our industry. I mean, there's two really, I mean, the intellectual capital bit comes with people. The other bit is usually property. Yeah. So we're probably about to redefine the second one.
And just on that, Iain, you mentioned that quite a number of employees at your organisation have returned to some office working. How do you see that playing out in the next kind of 4 to 6 months in terms of the blended approach? Do you think it's going to be something that all of your employees will adopt long term, and at times working from home and at times in the office, or how's your view on how that will play out over the next few months?
Well, I mean, regardless of my view, Corey, actually, we've surveyed our folks, and we basically got classic third, a third, a third. So they're not all equally sized groups. So you've got one group of people that has been on their kitchen table for the past 4 months, sharing that kitchen table with 2 or 3 other housemates, really crap ergonomics, and they don't have the luxury of a study or being on their own or gardens, and some of them have been quite keen to get back in. Yeah, there's another group of people who are extremely cautious, see big signs when you travel, which is, are you a key worker? If you're not a key worker, why are you traveling? Just don't want to do that. And then there's another group of people that are sort of classic swing voter or sort of swayable in the middle. But we've got basically the first 2 sets of groups thinking, I want to just try it out. And when I say try it out, I was in the office on Monday, and I think we probably had about 25% of our people on the door on Monday, in London at least. But until the government or governments, wherever you're located, basically say, right, those who are working from home can now work in an office. You're also, as a leader, you're in this very, very, very grey area of saying, we've secured it, come in, but don't come in if you're shielding, obviously. Don't come in if you live with people who are shielding, obviously. And it's kind of up to you. But I think the honest reality we've got to understand is that without moving to, say, a blended format and some of the things that we're talking about earlier in answer to Siobhan, we're being very productive. We are being very productive. I think all of us who are leaning in are being productive, but we're not being as completely productive as we were in January. And that's a statement of the bleeding obvious that everyone's taken a hit as a result of this, notwithstanding what we're seeing kind of coming back. But I mean, I'm not, everyone's budget for 2020 looks different now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. Just the last point on this subject of returning to the office, Howard Walker's asked, he's mentioned that we're already seeing job advertising specify virtual location. However, these seem to be for fixed term projects, and he asks, will it be back to normal in terms of location in a year's time, or is this be a permanent thing? And I suspect you from what you've said, it's very much a case of a blended approach going forward.
I think it's blended, Howard, because even if I forget what we're doing ourselves, I just look at what clients are doing. So I was talking to a client about 2 weeks ago. They've got 2 really big sites, one with 1,500 people, one with 500 people. The lease on the smaller one comes up at the end of December, and they're not renewing it. They're just not renewing it. So people are taking live decisions right now to frankly think about how they cut their cloth. And as I say, I think in our world there's 2 materials in that cloth. There's people and there's property, and a way of trading through this for an awful lot of people is to if they can, if you're locked into something that's 10, 15 years on property, it's different. But if you can adjust your property cost to therefore be able to incentivize your people, that's what I'm seeing certainly at the client level.
Interesting. Moving away from this, one of the other things that stood out from what you mentioned earlier on was that China's becoming your new Brexit.
Yeah.
And you're having, as you said, I think up to 5 conversations a week specifically on that issue. I'm really interested to get your thoughts on how you see that developing over the next few months, and what challenges that may bring for communications professionals. So
it's again, just I'm very conscious that not everybody, I think, on the call is UK, but I think it's particularly accentuated here in the UK right now, not least with the Hong Kong situation. But to some extent, Trump has accentuated this too for the past 4 years in America, the whole kind of trade war piece. But trade war has been given a supercharge by this. And even if we kind of come back from China, my broad reflection is that certainly in across our client base, you've got this very interesting juxtaposition of big and global, which is surviving because it's well capitalized, it's got the deep pocket, and it can mitigate being down in one market if it's up in another market, versus the patchwork of regulation and policy responses and nationalism. Angela Merkel is suddenly more popular now than she's been for 5 or 6 years by locking Germany down, by having a country by country approach to this. It's fascinating. And I mean, needless to say, the effects of the debate in this country in the last 4 or 5 years and the election result have taken us towards a country first approach as well. So, I mean, okay, so this is me as a running a comms business. So, I mean, obviously there's an opportunity in that. Big global, having to navigate increasingly local is a big theme. On the China question, this is only going to get worse. China knows this is a long game. China's prepared for this scenario. China gamed this scenario way before Trump. You know, I mean, this is a very, very, very long game and long approach. But just, you know, to vignette this, it's only 5 months ago, Corey, that the UK government was ready to use Chinese investment to build HS2 faster, the super fast railway line for those who are not in the UK. That is now off the table. And so therefore, you know, there's two things which I think are real and practical and for people like us to get our arms around. The first is that there is still a lot of Chinese investment taking place. There's a lot of Chinese fund flows taking place. And the politicians have yet to kind of catch up with that. But when they do, there's a big question as to whether or not those funds can continue to flow. And if we, United States, to some extent at a European Union level as well, are going to, quote unquote, punish China for the coronavirus, then there are big questions about where the money's coming from in the future. Now, that's not, I mean, I'm not taking a view on that. I'm just saying you're going to take a piece out of the jigsaw that a lot of the businesses that people on this call will be part of or work with will, they'll need to solve that problem.
It'll be fascinating to see how it plays out. And I think it's part of it is part of a broader theme about, and I think you referenced it already, businesses scrutinizing how they go about their business and looking at the impact that it has on all of their stakeholders. And
which camp are you in? I'm going to come back to this point I was making up front, which is, are you in the China camp or are you in broadly the North America camp? Will you work with companies that are in the China camp or will you work with companies that are in the North America camp? Will you work with the Chinese online sphere or will you work with the North American online sphere? Huge questions, which have been supercharged by this.
Steve Harrison on the chat has asked, is the China option purely bipolar, pro-China or pro-US? Both of those protagonists might have people believe that. The UK might examine what other governments have done to preserve a worthwhile trading relationship whilst reserving the right to challenge Chinese misbehaviour in certain areas, including those which China sees as internal.
I mean, it's a great question. So I think that we're going to get a part of the jigsaw that's going to help us define that, and that is going to, I think, be predicated on what happens in November in America. Yeah.
Your personal prediction for that?
No, I'm not going anywhere near that. Not a chance. Not a chance am I going to predict that one. I mean, I've got personal views on this, but I have, don't underestimate the current gentleman in the White House at all, and what he's doing and what he's planned to do for the next few months. I think that, in a way, one of the decisions kind of comes through here, one of the impacts comes through to the question from Steve around what does happen in November. Because I think there will be if it remains Trump, I do think my idea of bipolarity gets supercharged. I think if it is not Trump, it's not to say Biden is going to suddenly go, kumbaya, China, let's make peace in trading terms. No, he's not. But I think there'll be the chance of a calmer dialogue.
Okay, I think that brings us nicely to an end. Iain, I know you're pressed for time, so I'd just like to thank you very much for your insight. That was absolutely fascinating.